They like to probe perimeters. They had a coordinated, planned attack to try to destroy a firebase. They'd be pouring mortar rounds into you, like crazy, firing rockets just to keep everybody's head down. And while they're doing that, they'd have these sappers going through the wire. We're firing rifles. One of their mortar rounds went into there was a bunker on the perimeter. It landed right straight on the bunker.
Curious Humanography is proud to partner with Utah Honor Flight, part of the National Honor Flight Network, giving veterans the trip of a lifetime to Washington, D.C. to visit memorials built in their honor. Each flight is free for veterans and made possible by generous donors. To learn more or support their mission, visit utahhonorflight.org and find your local Honor Flight hub at www.honorflight.org. Also, if you'd like to see more stories like this, please support us by subscribing to our channel, liking, commenting on the video, and sharing it with your friends. Your support helps us continue to bring stories that deserve to be heard. Thank you for watching, and now back to our show. Paul, thanks for talking today.
Sure.
Let's start a little bit. Give me your name and give me a little bit of your background, where you're from and all that stuff.
My name is Paul Henderson. I am originally from Tacoma, Washington. That's where I grew up through high school. You want beyond that?
How did you tell me? Let's go to how did you end up in Vietnam?
Well, I volunteered for the draft in 1968.
So you back up a little bit, lead up to that a little bit.
Well, I started college in the fall of 1966 at the University of Washington. And I've been a ski racer my whole life. And that's what I wanted to do. And sitting up there and reading books and all that was not conducive to that. So after 6 weeks, I dropped out of the University of Washington, moved up to Crystal Mountain, spent the whole winter racing. And as a result, I lost my student deferment, my 2S deferment. I went back to school at a junior college in Tacoma to try to, because I was told that if you make up the credits and, get to where you were supposed to be, you could get your deferment back. And that may be true. But in 1968, when I was doing all this stuff, they needed people a lot. You had a lot of casualties in Vietnam. And so they wanted, if you had a break in service, that was it. You were going. I kept putting them off by enrolling in school. And finally they just said, don't bother. You're going. So I said, well, the hell with you guys. So I just went down and volunteered for the draft. And then all that meant was that I went in earlier than I would have otherwise. I just said, let's go ahead and do this, get it over with. So I went in the Army.
Where'd you go to basic?
Fort Lewis.
What was that like?
Miserable.
Do tell.
Well, I went there in the winter. And it was a horrible winter up here, lots of snow, and which we usually don't get a lot of. So it was cold and it was miserable. It was rain. If it wasn't snowing, it was raining and then freezing, and it was no fun.
What were your drill sergeants like?
They were okay. I mean, they were drill sergeants. They're yelling at you and barking at you and that sort of thing. But I never saw anything that I thought was abusive or inappropriate as far as what they were doing.
Had some of them been in Vietnam? Not really.
A couple of them had, and a couple of them had not. So I went through basic, and then they assigned me to AIT, the Advanced Infantry Visual Training, to the artillery school at Fort Sill. So I showed up there in the winter. Winter in southern Oklahoma is pretty bad. I mean, it was cold. And I went through AIT there in the artillery, and I sort of liked it. It was challenging. And I did pretty well at it. And then they had a program. They were losing so many people in Vietnam, junior NCOs, sergeants, and staff sergeants. And so the Army came up with these programs in combat arms, infantry, artillery, and armor. And it was like an instant NCO school. You went to a course for 4 months where you were taught all kinds of advanced stuff to whatever you were doing. I was artillery. And then they put you in a unit in the States for 2 months. After the 4 months, they promoted you to sergeant, E5. And then they put you in a unit for 2 months just so they'll watch you, make sure you weren't a fluke. And then you had to volunteer to go to Vietnam in order to go to this school, but that was no big deal because everybody was going to Vietnam. And but then right after that, bingo, you went to Vietnam. And so that's how I wound up.
What were you thinking before you went over there? Were you scared? Were you nervous?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I felt somewhat better because I did do, 4 months of pretty intense training. That was all geared toward Vietnam. That's what this whole program was for. Nobody went through that program and then went to Germany. Everybody went to Vietnam. So, I had more training than most people, which I felt was an advantage. I also wound up with a lot more responsibilities than most people. But after I got into Vietnam, that was okay.
Tell me about going to Vietnam. You flew over on a airline?
Flew over, out of Air Force Base in California, just north of San Francisco. They showed up in Oakland, and they had an Oakland Army depot there, and they issued you your uniforms and your field equipment and that kind of stuff. And you stay there for a few days, and then they shipped you out to the Air Force Base. And the night before we left, they put us into a great big hangar, and it was just filled with bunk beds. And all the lights were on, and nobody's sleeping, because you're going to Vietnam the next morning.
Yeah.
And so we stayed there overnight, and then the next morning they shipped us out, put on a World Airways DC-8, and off we went. Went through Alaska, then Japan, and then into Vietnam.
Where did you land in Vietnam?
Bien Hoa, down by Saigon.
Getting off the airplane.
Well, we got there in the middle of the night, and it was really hot. And it had a smell that's a combination of feces. There was a lot of that. Rotting vegetables, fish sauce. It just had this distinct odor that I've never smelled anywhere else, and was pretty much common throughout Vietnam, but particularly down by the cities.
Okay. After you landed, what happens?
Well, they put us on a bus that had mesh wire over all the windows, so they would break up RPGs, hopefully. And they bussed us from Bien Hoa to Long Bien, which was not too far away. Probably, I don't know, I can't remember exactly, maybe a half-hour drive or something. And I mean, you'd always, what's going on? There were a couple of places where they slowed down, and they had an M60 machine gun in that bus. And there were a few places where I guess they had some ambushes or something, so they would slow down and fire that spot up. So it was exciting, tense. You just don't know what to expect. I got to Long Bin, started meeting some of the other people who were on board, and we just got there. And then I don't know how long I was in Long Bin. It was 3 days, 4 days, maybe. And from there, then I was assigned to the 101st Airborne Division.
And where did you go then?
Then I went back to Benoit, because at that time, the 101st was headquartered in Benoit, even though the rest of the division was all up north, up in Icor, up by the DMZ, about 300 miles north. But they had an in-country orientation course for everybody who was going to the 101st. And a lot of it was just acclimating to the heat. We did a lot of running because running in that heat and humidity just kicks your ass. But it's about the fastest way to get acclimated to that climate is to do that. Just go out and do PT in it. And it was not easy. And we did some other stuff. They had some courses on patrolling and calling in artillery fire, things about the bugs and the snakes, what to look out for.
Oh, what'd they say about that?
Oh,
you remember?
Well, they always said the classic was the guy got up and he says, there's 17 varieties of venomous snakes in Vietnam, any one of which can kill you. They also have one they call this two-step snake. And it's called two-step snake because once it bites you, you make it 2 steps before you fall over dead. And the guy says, don't believe it. We have documented people who have made it 4 and 5 steps before dropping dead. So I remember a conversation I had one time because the insects there and the snakes and all that, it's pretty scary, especially growing up in Western Washington. We don't have any of that. And I had an older NCO one time, and I was expressing some fear about that in the first few weeks I was over there. He said, 30-some thousand guys have been killed over here so far. I said, I think 2 of them were from snake bites. So you don't have to worry about the NVA. Don't worry about the snakes. So anyway, I went through that course. And then got on a C-130 and flew up to Phu-Bai, which is just south of Hue. And then I think it was helicoptered out to a place called LZ Sally, which is where my battalion headquarters was. So I went in there and they issued me some more equipment, issued me a weapon, and met with the battalion commander, and then I got on another helicopter and went out to Fire Support Base Bastogne, out toward the Shau Valley.
What was that place like?
Well, it was big for a fire base. I mean, sometimes fire bases would just be a cleared spot on top of a mountain. All of our fire bases where I was, we were in the mountains. So they were all on the top of mountains. They weren't like on the flats like they were down south.
And what did you have on your fire base? You had a bunch of artillery. You talk about
there were 3 artillery batteries there. There was a 105 unit, and that's what I was in. There was a 155 unit, and there was a 8-inch 175 unit there. There was the battalion headquarters for the 2nd and the 501st Infantry. So as fire bases go, it was pretty good size.
And what were your duties? What was your day-to-day?
Well, it was kind of weird. You see, when I went through that NCO course, I mean, everybody knew about this, and especially the old hands who'd, taken them 7 or 8 years to make E5, and I'd made it in less than a year. And they initially assigned me as a recon sergeant on a forward observer team. So I would go out with the infantry and adjust fire, which is the one thing they didn't teach us in that school. So I had to brush up on that real fast and brush up on map reading real fast and how to adjust fire. But that didn't last long at all. What happened was, as the Army got wind of this is what was going on, and they said, hey, look, we've spent lots of money getting these artillery NCOs for positions on gun crews and that's where they got to go. So immediately I'm yanked out of the infantry and put back into the artillery. So I was on this firebase. I initially was made what they call a chief of section. We had these, they were called the M102 Howitzers, and it was a 105, which is about the smallest cannon round that the Army has. And this was a new design because, most artillery pieces had what they called trails, the Chemac, and they would dig in because the front's over there. Well, the front was everywhere in Vietnam. So they did this thing and had a roller tire on it. The trails came together, had a central pivot point underneath the howitzer, and you could spin that thing 360 degrees or 6,400 mils in the artillery. So you could fire in any direction. And it was also about half the weight of the old 105s. So they were easily air transportable. You could pick them up with a Chinook. The 101st at that time, along with the 1st Cav, who were down south, was developing air mobile, air assault operations and how to do them. And so we had lots of helicopters. We didn't have anything in the division any equipment that could not be moved by a helicopter.
What kind of copters did you have? Did you have all of the different kinds? Or?
Yeah, everything from the Loaches, the Hughes 500s, lots of Hueys, Cobras, and Chinooks.
And how many 105s were you dealing with yourself?
In the battery, there was 6. And I was a gun chief on one of them.
Now, how many guys are working with you on that?
Usually it's like 8 or 9 guys. That was the whole crew.
Yeah, and what's a crew entail of? What's everybody's job on that crew?
Well, you had the chief of section. That was me. And I ran the whole operation. We had a gunner who basically would set the deflection off. We'd use aiming states and a panoramic telescope, and he would line those things up when we get the data from Fire Direction Center. And then there was an assistant gunner, and he managed the elevation. We'd be given a setting for the azimuth on the panoramic telescope. Gunner would set that off. Assistant gunner would set the elevation. We'd be given that as well. And he also had the great job of pulling the lanyard, which was really popular. He could trade that for rations, Hey, you want to come up, pull the lanyard? Then we had there was what they call a number 1 man, and he was behind the breech of the howitzer, and he would be fed the rounds and load them in, and then step back when they launched them. And then the other guys were carrying rounds, cutting charges. The 105 rounds was like a big bullet. It has a brass canister with a primer in it, and inside that canister, and then the shell on the end with a fuse on the end of it. And inside that canister, there were 7 different powder bags of different sizes, and they would compute which charge, charge 1, charge 4, charge 6, that you needed to fire for the target that they were hitting. So they would have to take the round out of the canister, take out the powder bags they didn't need, get rid of those, put the round back together, and then get it into the howitzer.
You enjoy doing that?
It was real interesting. It was, when I first went in the Army, I was just a 19-year-old kid out of Tacoma, and the Army allowed me to discover things about myself that I was not aware of, that I had certain abilities and capabilities and that never occurred to me that I even had. And part of it was being able to run that section in combat and deal with that. And I certainly wasn't perfect, and I certainly was scared a lot, but I was able to function and I was able to do the job. And, that really kind of opened up things for me, that stayed with me my whole life. If you work on something, you can be good at it.
Were you guys firing every day?
Just about.
Or mostly nights? Or all day and night?
Mostly nights. Sometimes we get day missions. We had two jobs. During Tet 68, Way was occupied for a long time. Big bloody battle, mostly Marines. They occupied the Citadel. Way was the ancient capital of Vietnam, but Tet went on over the whole country, but most of it got shut down fairly quickly. Not Way. Way took a long time, several weeks. So part of what we were doing was covering the infiltration routes out of the Shau Valley. Shau is about, 20 miles long or something, a mile or two wide. And it was a major route, Ho Chi Minh Trail route. It was also, that was a rear area for the NVA. They had hospitals there. They had supply places there. They had vehicles, training areas. I think they had an R&R center there. And so we would cover it for looking for infiltration, keep them from going back down to the coastal cities, Da Nang, Hue, that area. And then the other mission we had was to interdict into the Shau Valley and the surrounding area there, try to disrupt supply lines and cut them off to the extent that we could while they were still up north.
That would mean leaving the base. You'd go out.
Yeah.
Mostly.
Yeah.
How often would you do that?
Sometimes we would, they just switch things around, okay, we're going to put another infantry unit out here. You guys are going to be assigned to them for a while. They're going to operate this area. Sometimes we did what they were developing this, artillery raids. And what they do is they had special forces teams out there on the ground, sneaking around the Shau Valley, and they would identify targets. Hey, we got something here, bunker complex, we got a truck park, we got an ammunition dump, whatever. And so they get the information back. They would call us up, and we get anywhere from, I never saw more than 4 howitzers, but anywhere from 2 to 4 howitzers. They pick us up by a helicopter, take us out, drop us out, right close to that target, blow the place up, then pull us out, lift us up, and take us back out.
Tell me about one of those. That sounds kind of interesting. Were you out there for more than a day? Or were they quick?
Usually not, except when we had one time where we were supposed to be out for 4 or 5 hours and then back, and the weather closed in. We didn't get out for 4 days. And we had, I think, 3 howitzers on that.
And how many guys are with you when you go out like that?
Well, each one of the crews would have
The 8.
8 guys, and then we had a platoon of infantry that was doing security around the perimeter. So not very many, 50, 60 guys. And there were like 50,000 out in that area. I mean, it was pretty dense. So that was kind of hairy.
How often would you take incoming from those guys?
It's hard to say. Fairly often. They did a lot of what they call just their own harassment and interdiction fire. They'd go set up on a hill across from us and fire 15 or 20 RPGs into us. They'd set up mortars, put a lot of mortar rounds in. And then they like to probe perimeters, see if they could get into a perimeter. So we're always having to deal with that. Guys trying to come through the wire. Once in a while, I was only in one of these, but there was one where they had a coordinated, planned attack to try to destroy a firebase. And that was pretty hairy. They'd prep it they'd be pouring mortar rounds into you like crazy, firing rockets just to keep everybody's head down. And while they're doing that, they'd have these sappers going through the wire. And for an artillery base, what they would do is they would carry satchel charges. And they'd try to throw those into personnel bunkers. But mainly what they try to do is destroy howitzers with it. So they throw that underneath the howitzer and blow up the howitzer.
And when that's going on, you're firing at the same time, right?
Well, no, we're firing rifles at that time
because they're too close.
Yeah, it's too close.
Yeah.
If they get on the base inside the wire, howitzer's not going to do you much good.
That only happened once.
That only happened once to me.
How long did that last? Was that all night?
It's hard for me to say. It seemed like a long time. It was. They were shelling us for quite a while, and some guys got killed off of that. I remember one of their mortar rounds went into there was a bunker on a perimeter. It landed right straight on the bunker. It killed everybody in it. It was all pretty chaotic. But it's never fun getting shot at.
Yeah, I can't imagine, honestly.
Well, it's terrifying. I mean, the first time I ever was in a rocket attack, I was like, I froze. Which, fortunately, there was no downside to that because they were just shooting rockets and then they were going to book. There was no attack that was associated with it. But I remember it really bothered me that I'd frozen off of that. And I talked to some other guys who'd been there for a while, and they said, that's common. Just next time you'll know what to do. And that was true. I mean, you never got over being afraid, but you could function. That's how you could function. And then, the longer I was over there, the more I was doing this, the more I sort of grew into the job. And then I started doing things like volunteering for, they needed,
Like, give me a for instance.
oh, they were doing an artillery raid, and the senior NCO in the battery was called the chief of firing battery. They call him chief of smoke. And it was an E7 slot. And that guy would go out and be kind of responsible for all the tactics. He'd lay the howitzers, he'd go out there with an aiming circle and have them all oriented so they could get the data in, and kind of supervised all of that stuff. And I knew how to do that. And so there were a couple of raids that we're doing, and they said, we need a chief firing battery. I said, oh, I'll do it. I know, it was kind of crazy. But you get kind of crazy. When you're living in that environment all the time, you're, and like I said, when you're 20 years old and you've got these super kill weapons and you can get jets out there and attack helicopters and all that just by picking up the radio, it's pretty heady stuff. I mean, that's a lot of power at your fingertips. And when you can do that successfully, it certainly built my confidence, and not just in doing that, but I think just generally, have the experience of being able to do something that's important and be competent at it is big stuff for a 20-year-old.
The men you worked with, did you feel like they had your back?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I formed closer bonds with some people, but I mean, everybody out there, we were all doing the same job. We were all facing the same stuff, and we all depended on each other to perform. And I had a couple of instances, a couple of people who just weren't capable of doing the job, and we got rid of them. Some interesting guys. Did you ever hear about the president's 100,000? Lyndon Johnson decided he was going to put a happy face on the war in Vietnam. So he came up with this program of all these inner city kids that had dropped out of school, and they'd take them in the Army. They'd put them through a course so that they could get a diploma, a high school diploma, and then, deploy them. Yeah, to learn a trade like shooting howitzers. And we had a kid there from South Chicago, and nice kid, hard worker, good fighter, everything. And he was part of the 100,000, So I asked him, I said, well, what was I? He said, oh, man, teacher had big boobs. One day, this really got me. One day, we're all sitting around talking about R&Rs, where we're going to go, Taipei, Tokyo, Sydney, Bangkok. And I could just watch this kid. I don't want to say his name. He was obviously confused. And so finally I pulled him aside and says, you know where you are? He says, oh yeah, man, I'm in Vietnam. I says, do you know where Vietnam is? And he says, it's by Texas. So we found a map somewhere, showed him where he was. He was very surprised. But, that was the only frame of reference.
Yeah.
He's a good kid, though. I liked him a lot.
And where did you go on R&R? And how long out were you when you went?
I went to Hawaii. Not because I was married, but my girlfriend was a student at the University of Hawaii. So, I was entitled to get another 7-day leave, which I was going to take and go to Taipei. So, you could buy stereos and Rolex watches and all that stuff. But I got hurt about 2 weeks before I was supposed to go. So
how long out were you when that happened? How long were you over there?
10 months. Just a little over 10 months.
So that got squashed.
Yeah.
What happened? Tell me about getting hurt.
Well, we were they rotated us out. We've been in the A Shaw for months, in and out of the A Shaw. They rotated us out and put us on a fire base down along the coast. It was sort of like, here, you guys can take it easy. Old fire base. I think it was originally built by the French, used by the Japanese, and right above the coast. And there was a hill that was less than a click out from where we were, and it was higher than we were. So, every now and then, Charlie would go up there and shoot some rockets or fire some mortars at us and that sort of thing. So we were doing nightly, what they call H&I fires, harassment and interdiction fires. And so we just fire up the top of the hill and just say, hey, you want to come up and take shots at us? Okay, but you never know. We're going to turn this thing into an inferno. And it was all charge one, we're just shooting very short distances. You do it all Kentucky windage. And so I was directing those shots, and I was standing behind the breech of the Howitzer. We were just shooting charge one, so there's little pops out there. And there was a new kid in the unit, and he was cutting charges. So he had to seat the round in the canister, then pull it out, take out 6 powder bags, break it off, put it back together, and then hand off the round. Well, somehow or another, he hit the primer while he was trying to seat that round. I don't know exactly how he did it, but he hit the primer and 7 powder bags went off in his face, which killed him. But it flipped. There was enough suction in that to where it mushroomed the canister, so it was throwing shrapnel around, and it launched the artillery round about 10 feet across the gun pit, where it ran into the breech of the Howitzer and bounced off of that and into me. And it must have hit me. I must have had my arm up because it hit me here, broke my arm. I had fractured all the. I got some shrapnel stuff in the side of my face. Cut my hand real bad. I mean, this knifed, fleshy part out here on your knife edge was just hanging by thread. And it knocked me backwards, and I went over the trails of the house and landed on my head, knocked me out. And everybody thought, we were getting hit. And so they all look. And I'm laying there unconscious, and a good friend of mine, Ron Stoppelman, he's still a good friend, came out and saw this whole thing. And the danger was it was a fire, and, there's like 300 artillery rounds out there. Those go up, boom. So he got a fire extinguisher, and he got some guys and directed them to come and get me out, which they did. And he got the fire out. He got a soldier's medal for that.
Wow.
And pretty much saved my life.
Did they airlift you out of there?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they sent in a dust-off helicopter that night. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning. And flew me into the field hospital in Fubai.
Were you out the whole time?
No.
When did you come to?
Within 5 minutes.
Oh, wow.
I came to sitting gets the sandbags on the outside of the gun tip.
That must have happened so fast. You didn't even know what was going on, right?
No, I had all I knew was aware of is I saw a flash and I heard a whoomp, and then I felt myself going over backwards, and that was it.
And what happened in the hospital when you were there? What ended up happening there?
Well, I was in the Fubai hospital for a few days, and they put the wrong cast on me. They came in the middle of the night. The doctor was about my age, 23 or 24, and they had a new corpsman who was working in the middle of the night, and the doctor did the x-ray, identified the fracture, and told his kid to put a cast on it. Well, he'd never put a cast on before, and he wanted to make sure he did a really good job, so I had a cast that was out to here, weighed about 30 pounds, and he put a short arm cast on, which was doing no good at all. He needed to have a long arm cast to immobilize his bone. So every time, I'd move this thing, it was bone scraping on bone. I'd scream, fall out of bed. And I was then transferred from that. I had a long bone fracture and less than 3 months left in my tour. So that was automatic. You're out of here. So they sent me to I think it was an Air Force hospital in Da Nang. And I sat there for quite a while, a week or so, because they were evacuating people to Japan a lot. And there were a lot of people who were hurt a lot worse than I was. So they get priority. Well, that was okay, except this thing on my hand where it was they didn't suture it because they didn't want to do any kind of surgical procedure in Vietnam if they didn't have to. And so that thing just got wrapped up and they give me antibiotics. And so for, 10 or 12 days, it healed. And then when I got to Japan, they had to rip it apart so they could cleanse it, stitch it, and do all that. I would say military medicine is to medicine what military music is to music. So anyway, then they sent me to Camp Zama in Japan, which was horrible. It was a horrible experience.
In what way?
Well, you're out in the field and people get hurt. They're on a helicopter and they're gone. Or they get killed, they're on a helicopter and they're gone. And when I got to Camp Zama, I was in the orthopedic ward, which was gunshot wounds and traumatic amputations and that sort of thing. And there were people in there who were on like a rotisserie. They had a full body cast and they had to move them so that the fluids wouldn't, tremendous guys that were all wrapped up and just had a hole that they could drink through a straw. So when I sat there and looked at this carnage and this suffering, and I was right across the hall from the burns ward, which was, oh man, those guys were it was awful. You guys, you'd see all skinned up. One guy, his back looked like hamburger had been left out in the sun too long. And it just overwhelmed me. I mean, it was horrible. And you're just confronted with all this. I mean, I just kind of closed up. Didn't want to talk to anybody. Didn't want to do anything. I remember a chaplain came by and I didn't like chaplains much. They were the ones who'd barely come out in the field and then want to know when their helicopter was leaving. And when's the last time you got hit? I remember he came by and, he was trying to be cordial. How you doing, son? Anything I could do for you? And my response was, yeah, you can get the hell out of my sight. I'm probably not the first guy he ran into with that kind of attitude, because he just said, "Okay, call me if you need me." Took off.
How long were you in Japan then?
I think I was there about 10 days. And then flew a C-141 back to the U.S.
Well, and how many guys were on the plane? Was it a lot or no?
I can't tell you exactly. They had a set, it was a C-141, big 4-engine jet. And they had the center part of it, they had put in like airline seats. So the ambulatory patients would sit in the airline seats, and then the rest of them were litters, people on stretchers that were mounted against the wall.
So that flight was sending injured people home.
Yeah, that was strictly a medevac flight.
Yeah.
And
what was going through your head? I bet there was some relief to going home. Was it kind of a bittersweet kind of thing?
Well, yeah, some. I mean, I had a little bit of guilt about leaving because, I'm going pretty close to the guys in the unit and thought I had an important job. And so there was some guilt about it. I was relieved, oh my God, I survived Vietnam. And then I just had this general feeling. I can remember sitting on the airplane saying, something really significant has just happened to me, but I don't really know what it is. And I really don't know what the significance is. And I didn't find that out for a long time, but I felt like I had passed through a important stage in my life that was going to have effects later on. But I wasn't any good at pinpointing what was going on at that point. That took years and years.
And what happened? What happened after you got back then? Where'd you land?
I keep trying to remember the name of the Air Force base.
Is it the one in Oakland?
Yeah, North Oakland.
Yeah, I don't know the name of it.
But yeah, we went back in there. They gave us a steak dinner, showed us a John Wayne movie.
That's pretty bizarre.
Yeah. Well, it was the year True Grit came out. So I was sitting there watching John Wayne shoot guns out of both hands with brains in his mouth. And then they had their own little airline thing. They were using these they call them, I think, a C9, but it was a small twin-engine jet. It used to be a commuter jet back in those days. Can't remember the nomenclature on it, but they would pick us up and then they'd take us out of there and then take you around to the military hospital that was closest to your home. So I flew out of there, flew up to McCord Air Force Base, and then was admitted to the hospital at there at Fort Lewis, and assigned to a medical holding company. And then I was just there until my arm healed and the wounds healed, and I got through physical therapy. And then they just said, "Okay, you're out of the Army."
Wow, how long was that process?
A couple of months.
That must have been really awful. Was it boring?
What
was going on then?
It was, the first thing they gave me was a 30-day convalescent leave. So I just went home, 30 days. And then I went back, and of course, you have to be gainfully employed. And they couldn't put me on any really bad details because I made E6 while I was over there. I made staff sergeant. And so, they couldn't have me out picking up cigarette butts or painting rocks because I was an NCO. So they gave me this job. It was just a make work, phony job. You work like 5 days and got 2 weeks off. And I was a courtesy patrolman. And I had to show up in Class A's. and wander the halls. And if anybody needed directions, I was supposed to help them out. But the main thing I was supposed to do was give, I think they call them DRs, delinquency reports, to guys who didn't have an appropriate haircut, which I was not in the mood to do. I did not care how long anybody's hair was. And after doing this for a couple of days and not writing any, finally the company commander there, holding company commander, was the captain. He said, "Well, Sergeant Henderson, I noticed you haven't written up any delinquency reports. What's going on?" I said, "Well, sir, I didn't see any problem." And the first sergeant was sitting there, and he knew what was going on. Finally, he grabbed me later. He says, "I tell you what, just stay home." He says, "Call in every couple of days just so we know you're okay, but don't worry about coming in anymore." So that was it until I got through physical therapy, and then they just released me from the Army.
Wow. And what was your thought process at the end of all that?
Well, I was glad to be out of the Army.
Yeah.
You know, there was a lot of, like I said, I got a lot of benefit, a lot of self-validation out of the Army, but I didn't want to be in there. I wanted to be back home and doing my civilian stuff. I'm still only 21 years old.
And you said, we talked a little earlier, you said you didn't really talk about being over in Vietnam after you got back. Tell me about that a little bit.
I didn't talk about what?
You didn't mention to people that you have been in.
No.
Tell me about that a little
bit. The war was extremely unpopular. This was 1970. And, all kinds of stuff going on. Kent State, people are blowing up ROTC buildings, demonstrations all over the place. The war was extremely unpopular. And so it really wasn't, it didn't feel safe to tell people you just come back from Vietnam. It came up, I told you before, it came up a couple of times, and somebody asked, and I'd say, yeah, I just came back from Vietnam. And the response you'd get was, like, if I just told them I had terminal cancer. They didn't know what to say. And they wanted away from that as soon as possible. It was very, very awkward. Because by that time, the war was really unpopular. I never had an situation where, anybody spit on me or
called you a baby killer or any of that.
Yeah, no, I never had that.
Yeah. Tell me about, okay, so what the trajectory? So after that, you went to Sun Valley. Give me a little, what happened the rest of your life and the influence of that.
Well, the whole time I was in Vietnam, I promised myself, I was a skier. I said, when I get out of here, I'm going to go to Sun Valley and ski, do nothing but ski for 3 months. Well, I went down there, and that turned into 3 years. And there were a whole lot of us there. There were just detoxing Vietnam vets. And it's a funny term to use since we drank a lot. People said drinking, taking drugs, skiing like a maniac. It was just kind of trying to unload stuff. And there were some people there because they were Vietnam vets that you could talk to, or I could talk to, because they had going through somewhat similar stuff. That's why they were there. So I stayed there in Sun Valley for 3 years, and then I decided I need to go back and finish school. So I did. I went back to the University of Washington. They let me back in, and because I was a Vietnam vet, they gave me my 1968 or 66 tuition, which was $78 a quarter.
Can you imagine?
And I went through I wanted to get finished with school because I wanted to go off and do some other things. And so I took 5 straight quarters, went from one summer through the following summer, taking 20 hours a quarter just so I could graduate. And I took another year off, went back to Sun Valley for another winter. And then wound up going to law school in Portland. And, and at that point, I pretty much decided, well, okay, I'm just going to be normal now. I'm going to be a normal guy. Which I tried really hard to do. And, and I had some success being a lawyer. It was a good fit for me. But I had these symptoms of post-traumatic stress. I had nightmares. I had this phobia about closing my eyes. I'm not even sure where that came from, but darkness really triggered me. I mean, I had hair then. If I put my head under the shower to wash the shampoo out of my eyes, I would almost have a panic attack just closing my eyes that long. That went on for a long time.
At this point, were you equating that back to your service or no? Were you these symptoms? Were you equating it with? No.
I had gone back into the reserve program by that point, went through the Special Forces course, went to jump school, went to Special Forces course. And I was commissioned as an officer.
And what, given your experience, what made you go back into that? I mean,
there was something about it I missed. I missed the camaraderie, the brotherhood of the military. Where you could depend on people. There was an understanding, mutual respect, and mutual love for each other. You really, you're brothers in arms. There's a lot of truth to that. And I don't think I was thinking of it or articulating that in my mind in those terms, but there was something about that drew me back. And it was true. I mean, I really enjoy, of course, Special Forces is a dream job. Believe me, you get to do things that you would never, ever otherwise do. I never thought of myself as being like super soldier or anything, but so I was always surprised that I was a Green Beret officer. But when you're jump master on a C-141 over Korea in the middle of the night, blasting out and doing all that.
So you weren't getting any of those flashbacks or those uneasy feelings when you went back into the reserve? It was kind of like it was...
No.
Wow, that's
not really.
That's really interesting.
That didn't happen until later. Like early to mid 90s.
So you were in the what time? When did you go back into the reserves?
73.
Okay.
And I was there 74. I went 73 and 74. And then I was out while I was kicking around the country for a year. And then when I went into law school, I went back into the reserve, 76.
And you were in for how long after that?
20 years.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And, so it was, great people. That brotherhood is really there. I'm still very, very close to a lot of those guys. And, the opportunity to just do this tremendously fun stuff, taking down Air Force bases and running around Korea, Alaska. I really enjoyed it a lot.
And then the next kind of phase that happened to you, what was that? Talk about that a little bit.
Around early 93, 94, in that area, I was doing okay as a lawyer. But I started having these issues. I started having bad nightmares, really bad nightmares. The phobia around my eyes closed got worse. My anger would come out more often and more. I think I was pretty scary. Some people, I get so angry and just be filled with rage. I was having some flashbacks where I remember one time I was lying on a couch and I was back in a situation where there were rockets going off all around me. And, I wound up huddled on that couch and crying. And then I started drinking a lot, really a lot. And like I said, the more I drank, the worse the symptoms got. The worse the symptoms got, the more I drank. It was affecting my work, my marriage. I moved out, and I was getting pretty bad. And I got so that I did nothing. I never drank before 5:00. But at 5:00, from then on, that's about all I did was drink. And I would get these funks, and I'd get suicidal sometimes. And finally, one night, it all came to a head where I had a girlfriend who thought she was married. She was linking up with this successful lawyer. It turned out she linked up with this guy with post-traumatic stress and an alcoholic. And so she was unloading me pretty fast. And she had a new boyfriend, and I went over to her house one night, got arrested, and that's what got me into treatment for alcoholism, which pretty much saved my life. I was just in this horrible pain, and I couldn't attach it to anything. I didn't know what it was from. So getting arrested and being forced into treatment was saved my life. I don't think I would have lasted 30 days if that hadn't happened.
And then at that point, you talked about to me earlier that you didn't really believe you'd heard of PTSD because that had come out, but you just thought that was weak guys or whatever.
I had all the classic symptoms and was in total denial. I could accept the fact I was an alcoholic. there was not too much about that, but it was just, I'd always, I thought post-traumatic stress was for weaklings. I'm a Green Beret officer. I cannot have a psychological problem because of war. So I was in a lot of denial about it. I remember one time I was sitting in one of the guys in the treatment center, one of the counselors was saying, "Well, Paul, do you have anger problems?" "Yeah." "Do you have relationship problems?" "Yeah." "Do you have nightmares?" "Yeah." "Flashbacks?" "Yeah." All these things. And then he looked at me like, "Well," and I said, "Yeah, but I don't have PTSD. That's not me." And finally, one night, there was a former Marine, who was up in I Corps about the same time I was, who had called and said he'd like to talk to me. I didn't know him. And I didn't want to go. I didn't want to go talk to him. But they finally encouraged me to do it, to the point I said, okay, I'll go. And I met with him, and he sat down and told me his story, which was really close to my story. He came back. He was successful. He went to law school. He did things right. He finally wound up drunk, laying on the floor of the emergency room at the VA hospital with a .45 and threatening to kill everybody and himself. And I thought, I mean, this was my story, practically. And that opened me up at least to the possibility that perhaps there was some stuff going on from the war that was really affecting me. So I started being willing to get some help.
And where did you go?
Initially, I went to the VA. And the VA, I think, was helpful. There was some counseling there that I think was helpful. But there were, from the very, I didn't want to, I was a pilot, so I didn't want to take any psychotropic medications, or I'd be grounded. So I refused to take medications. And there was just something about the VA approach that didn't strike me the right way. I mean, their whole spiel was, you have post-traumatic stress disorder. There's something wrong with you. And it's permanent. You're never going to get rid of it. And the only thing you can do is learn to manage the symptoms. And the main way you should do that is through taking psychotropic medications. And I just did not ring true to me. And it wasn't until later where I got into the Soldier's Heart organization and linked up with Dr. Ed Tick, who founded this. And he'd been treating Vietnam veterans for a long time. And without much success. And so he started going back to these ancient warrior traditions of how did other cultures, warrior cultures, Asian, Greek, American Indian, how did they reassimilate their warriors back into the society successfully? Because they did. And they had methods of doing that, and reorienting the veteran, having them deal with the trauma and the issues, and then basically having them accept that you are now an elder warrior, and you have experience that most people don't have. And it gives you certain insights and capabilities and strengths that are unique to that. And your job now is to take those and put them back into your society, back into your tribe, so that they can benefit from that. And that resonated with me. And it's a totally different orientation than there's something wrong with you. You have a disorder. You're only 50% of a normal human being. That's what your disability rating is. And so anyway, I got very involved with Soldier's Heart.
Describe that for me.
Well, Ed would do this on 4-day retreats. And I went to one of those, and he kind of puts you through a process of, you isolate people, and you take care of them, all the food's taken care of and all that. And you go through a process then of accepting what happened to you. You know, a lot of people go into denial. I'm not going to think about that. I don't want anything to do with that. Nothing, I had to do it, but it doesn't mean anything. And so accepting this thing that you had an experience that you now have to deal with and can deal with successfully and be contributing to your tribe. Then there was storytelling. Everybody got a chance to get up and tell their story without any interruptions, no crosstalk, no nothing. And Ed called it getting the rock out of the rucksack. See, you've been walking around here for years and you got this big rock in your rucksack that's slowing you down and bogging you down and causing you problems. It's time to get it out. And the way you get it out is by talking about it, telling the story. And a lot of it, usually it was like the worst things that happened to you, or that you saw, or that you experienced, or that you're ashamed of. You have guilt over. In combat, you have guilt for things that you did sometimes. A lot of times you have guilt for things you didn't do. Oh, I should have done this. I should have done this. Should have done that. And you feel guilty about that. But it was all that stuff. And so everybody got a chance, tell their story, get it out there, get the rock out. And then there was a process of an initiation. And we do it with a symbol, it could be a spear. And we give people like a bandana you can wear around your neck or some part of your body that signifies that you have gone through this initiation. And then everybody will accept that and then give a vision. Okay, what am I going to do now? How do I turn this into something tangible in my life, in my culture, that I can do, that I can be positive about and feel good about. And that's what I believe. That's how we should deal with veterans, is that way, is to empower them as elder warriors, not as broken people. There was a picture. I use this a lot, and I give lectures on these, and I use it a lot. It's an old National Geographic picture, and it's a picture of a young baboon coming face to face with a leopard, and they're both skidding. You can see the dirt flying. They're both skidding into each other, and both of them got their mouths open with some pretty healthy teeth on both sides. And the story on that, and I was in Africa once, and I watched this. The baboons, moving troops of 20 to 200 animals, and they're very social, and they stop periodically to feed, to preen, to socialize, whatever. And when they do that, they take adolescent males and they send them out anywhere from 20, 40 meters out, depends on the terrain, the cover and that, and they sit out there. Usually 4 of them, and they're covering all directions in, and they have 2 jobs. When the predator shows up, they sound the warning of where it's coming from, so the rest of the troop can book, and if necessary, they hold the predator off to protect the tribe. And of course, when you see a leopard and a baboon, not all of them make it. But the ones who do, they come back into the troop and they become the elders in the troop because they have shown their commitment. They've shown courage. They've shown enough judgment that they can get out of that situation alive. So that's valuable stuff, and it's good for the troop. So they become the elders. So then I put that out, and I would talk to people. I says, suppose instead of doing that, they took those adolescents back and said, oh my God, that must have been awful. You go sit over there with the other ones. We'll give you some drugs so you don't even have to think about it. So how much good does that do for the society? So my whole point, and what I've been trying to do with this since I got involved, is to empower veterans, educate the public, and especially those who are close to the veterans, spouses, parents, siblings, but empower those veterans to accept that role as elder warrior, and do it with society too. It's like, instead of offering a veteran a seat in first class on the airplane, ask them to sit in the exit row. Because if you need somebody who can function under pressure, pretty good chance that's going to be your person. Instead of giving them a free hunting trip, ask them to teach skills to kids, land navigation, survival, first aid, so that they can take those skills and give them back and really contribute, and not isolate them and tell them you have a disorder, there's something wrong with you.
Have you had good luck with that with guys?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's a very, very effective program. And I stayed with it long enough. I became a facilitator. I never by myself, because I'm not a healthcare professional or a mental health professional. So I'd always work with somebody else. But I was probably, my biggest contribution, or the value that I had, was I had credibility. You know, I was a Special Forces combat veteran, and that's who somebody will listen to. That's who I listened to, was that Marine Corps veteran who had the same experience. The same way it works in AA. Somebody tells you got an alcohol problem, you say, but if a guy sits down and tells you his story, which is remarkably similar to your own story, then it grabs you to hear from somebody who's been there.
Okay, what age were you when you made that discovery, when you got with Ed and you did that whole thing? How old were you?
Let's see, in my 40s, early 40s. Late 40s, actually.
Late 40s.
Yeah, late 40s, early 50s.
And you've had a lot of interaction with other vets since then.
Yeah, well, we were doing a lot of these workshops for a while. When Iraq and Afghanistan were going, and everybody wanted to do something for the vets. This was a real popular thing. We got a lot of support, a lot of financial support. People were interested in referring people to us. We were doing workshops all over the country. We did workshops. I did workshops down at Hurlburt Field in Florida with Air Force Special Operations people. Went to Fort Campbell and worked with the people from the 101st Airborne and from 5th Special Forces Group.
Wow.
And so it was really successful. Well, you're talking about the guy who you interviewed, whose one experience was with a machine gun.
Yeah.
And I used to, when I was seeing this psychiatrist, and who did his residency at who's since become a friend, did his residency at a VA hospital. And I told him, I used to say, I was only over there for 10 months. How could I have this permanent condition? There's such an imprint on my life and all that. And he said, Paul, it can happen in 30 seconds. And then I remembered, the first time I ever got shot at was a rocket attack, RPG rockets, and they were flying past me. And they made this whooshing sound, whoosh, 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 and they pop. And one time I was driving across a desert in Nevada with this gal. We were going to Mexico, I think. And I had a sunroof in a Volkswagen. And I'm just driving along, and she opened that sunroof. And I wasn't paying attention. And it made this whoosh sound when it first opened. I damn near ran off the road.
That brought that back.
Scared me so bad. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, if you're struck with just uncontrollable fear, terror, it makes that kind of an imprint.
Your takeaway from all that, your experience over there at this point, you're how old now?
77.
77.
Yeah.
And we talked about this a little before. It's just startling how 1 year when you're so young can have such a impact on your relationships. What's your takeaway from everything at the end of the day?
Well, I believe that the experience of being in the military is transformational. Nobody comes out of the military the same person who went in. Even if you never go to war, the military affects you. If you go to combat, probably more so. And so with the perspective that I have now, I feel like my obligation is to, as I said before, to take that experience and turn it into something positive, give something back to my tribe. Because it is a unique experience. You know, most people don't have that. So that's what I've tried to do. And I you know, in a way, I'm grateful for the experience and the opportunity to do that. It's given me some real direction in my life. And the main thing I try to do is to pass that on to other vets, especially the ones who are stuck in the VA paradigm.
Have you had good response talking to the younger vets?
Oh yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah. They get a lot more education on this than we did. I mean, the military is screening people before they let them go. But yeah, and with older vets, that's like about 5 or 6 years ago, the Special Forces Association had its national convention in Portland. And so I was one of the speakers there, and I talked about this whole initiation thing and the elder warrior concept and all that. And I mean, these guys are all career Green Berets, you know. These are some tough guys.
Yeah.
And when I would talk about that, you know, I'd say, just because you took off the uniform doesn't mean you still don't have a mission. You know, get them into the concept of the elder warrior and their responsibility in that. And I could look out at that audience of these tough old Green Berets and just see the light bulbs go off over their head. Nobody ever tells them this. I'll tell them, you know, there's something wrong with you. And it really resonates with veterans, I found.
Well, that's cool that you got that message out there.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
Food. What was the food like over there? What was your takeaway on the food? What was the food like on the base and when you went out and did see rats for yourself?
Food on the base was, for a while on Bastogne, we actually had a mess hall. The breakfasts were pretty good.
what was a typical breakfast?
Typical, they fry eggs for you, and then they'd have bacon and sausage and, you know, real traditional breakfast. The other stuff, Well, we ate a lot of sea rats.
And
And they were never great, but you got used to them, and then you got enough Tabasco sauce. You can make anything taste okay. I like the spaghetti. The spaghetti was pretty good, and the beef slices were good. And of course, everybody wanted pound cake. Pound cake and fruit cocktail.
would you get to pick them, or was it random?
Well, you try to pick them. You do things to make them random. Like you put out a case of C's, and everybody's going to get them. You turn them upside down so they can't see what's in them. Just grab one, and then trade around if you want to. But no, everybody wants to go grab the beef slices and the pound cake and that stuff. Hell, they used to give us cigarettes in those sea rations. You can believe that. Everyone in the sea ration would have a little 5 cigarettes or so.
Most people smoke over there?
Yeah. We all smoked. Most of us.
The donut dollies.
Yeah.
Did you have those ever come to your base or no?
A couple of times.
Tell me about that. What was that like? Was that weird?
Yeah, it was weird.
Explain for the audience who the donut dollies were.
Well, they were these Red Cross girls, and they were young women, early 20s probably, something like that. And they would come out, and they were supposed to be morale boosters, for the troops. Bring a little bit of home. This was before cell phones and Zoom calls and all that. So, I had one phone call when I was in the hospital. That was the only phone call I had from Vietnam. Two things. One is they didn't like coming out in the field either. Very rarely saw them. The other thing it kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I mean, I remember one Christmas day they came out, and we were in a lot of heavy fighting around that time. And so they come out and start singing Christmas carols and playing games and stuff like this. And I just went,
just in the context of it seems
right? Yeah. And I went off and listened to my tape recorder and on music. I mean, they tried. I don't think they got out to the field all that much.
Yeah.
There was the real areas in Vietnam, the people down there were pretty much working like a regular job. They'd have regular hours and relatively secure. Once in a while, a rocket would come in or something, but not much. And it was like being in the army. I remember one time I hated going back there. I always thought, I want to go back to the rear. And one time I think I'd been out in the field for like 5 months. And I got word they needed to have me come in to sign some document. And so, the helicopter was coming out. So I got on the helicopter, and the first sergeant said, "Hey, spend the night, go to the bar, see a movie, do something like that." I was like, "Oh, okay." And I was so uncomfortable because I was back there, and everybody back there was like in the army. They shined their boots and saluting and all this stuff, and nobody had a weapon. And they all looked at me. I'm all beat up and like fatigues are half falling off of me, and they all look at me like, "What's with you?" And I was glad to get out of there
because you were in the real. You were doing real stuff.
Yeah.
And that seemed like pretend stuff.
Well, yeah, it was a part of the army everybody hates.
Yeah.
The
regulatory.
Yeah. The make work stuff, and you're going to be judged on how your boots are shined and the Garrison Army.
Okay. Was fragging a thing when you were there?
Not what I ever saw.
You never saw anything.
No, I heard about it, but we had to. The 101st was a pretty good outfit. A lot of tradition in the 101st, and they drummed that into you about the record in World War II and Band of Brothers stuff and Bastogne and so morale was pretty high actually among us, and bad leaders didn't last. If you had an officer or an NCO who went out there who was no good, they'd pull them out and replace them. They just didn't leave them out because they were too dangerous. They'd get other people killed. So the 101st was really good about that.
That makes sense. Okay, one last thing. Music. Was it a big deal where you were or no?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, we all had these little tape decks, with the cassette tapes. So when you're sitting on a firebase or something, you could, people would send us cassettes, all the late 60s, Hendrix and Led Zeppelin.
What were you into out there?
I liked Hendrix. I was a Hendrix guy. I like Crosby, Stills, and Nash too.
There was some good music back then.
Oh yeah, it was great.
Yeah,
I like the Doors. Doors were good. But yeah, we always had. We were back on the firebase. We always had music going.
That's wild. What a wild thing. It's wild that you were so young doing that stuff with a lot of responsibility, which is partly what makes the military cool, right? In that sense, it lets you grow up in a way.
Well, it challenges you and makes you grow up if you're going to fit into it. And I remember, I grew up like most kids, and I never thought I was all that great or all that capable or whatever. And I remember in basic training, we had pugil sticks. They were padded on the end, and you had a football helmet on and some padding and that sort of thing. And you go out and I think the guy there was a line or a little ditch or something, the person who got knocked back into that was the loser. Well, I never thought of myself as much of a fighter. I couldn't lose at pugil sticks. I mean, I beat everybody. And it so surprised me, and just, made me feel like I've got some capabilities here. Maybe I didn't even realize. And, you can build on that.
That's the last few guys I've interviewed. I've heard that story a lot. Where they saw something in themselves that they didn't see in civilian life.
Yeah. I say my most responsible job was I sold shoes. And you get thrown into that environment, and you get a lot of responsibility. You have quite a bit of power. And if you accept it, you can grow into that. I see kids now that are 20 years old, and I say, geez.
Wow.
And they put in a similar situation, they could probably be the same as I was and that, or anybody is at that.
Well, we live in a weird society where
you don't let
anybody have that.
Yeah, you can be 20 years old and act the same as when you were 13.
Yeah.
And nobody thinks twice about it.
Yeah.
So the military will do that for you.
Yeah. Well, thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Thank you.
It's a real pleasure, a real honor.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.